The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
You're now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Benjamin Dixon Show. I am not Benjamin Dixon, in case you didn't notice. If you didn't notice, you might be a racist, so you probably voted for Trump. Right, Nick? Benjamin Dixon? Something like that. Benjamin Dixon is not able to join us tonight because he is off doing something equally important, but he asked me to fill in for you. In case you do not know, my name is Brandon Sutton. It's on a little nameplate down there, and I'm being joined today by my co-host, Nick Nowlin. We're going to have a nice little discussion with you about the state of the DNC, the aftermath of the election, racism in America, a lot of different topics, if you're not too tired of them already. So, Nick, I have a quick question for you. Who is to blame for Hillary Clinton losing the election?
Hillary Clinton.
Are you sure? Are you sure?
Yes, I'm 100% sure.
Because it is 10 days later, and I still see on TV people pointing the finger at everyone else besides Hillary Clinton. I see it is Bernie Bros. I see it is sexism. I see it is Russia, Putin, James Comey. I don't know. Who else is it?
I don't know who else they could blame it on. The working white people, working white class.
The working white people, of course. So that's unfortunate. But I only bring it up because understanding whose fault it is going to help us understand how we solve that problem. And so the past week has been filled with the blame game. And we've got to the point now where we're trying to pick a new head of the DNC. And I think the name that's been floating on everyone's mind right now, so we're going to talk about him first, is Keith Ellison. So I know you have a problem with Keith Ellison being the head of the DNC. So can you tell us what your little bit of a problem is with that?
Yeah, I'm wondering, and this is not really a problem per se with Keith Ellison. It's just a problem that I see. You know, when Hillary Clinton was running for president, everybody was talking about it's going to be great. This is momentous. This is great to have the first woman president. And I asked this question on Project Sanity. Did we really want a woman president, or were we told we wanted a woman president? You know, which one was it? Did they give us what we wanted, or did they tell us what to want? And I'm wondering the same thing with Keith Ellison, because I was speaking to people and I asked some questions. I said, hey, you know, what has Keith Ellison exactly stated that he wanted to do to the DNC that will make you feel like he's the right person for the job? And the answer I got was, well, he hasn't said anything. And I'm like, well, why are we fighting for this person who has an unknown agenda? We don't know what he's going to do to necessarily change the DNC. We don't have him on record saying anything that we would like to see happen to the DNC. Why are we fighting for him to be in charge of the DNC? And reminder, the DNC is not necessarily a power position, so to speak. You know, it really is a coordinating board that helps them coordinate election strategy, but that's not necessarily a power position. So, you know, I'm wondering, why are we fighting over something and we really don't have anything to gain? Let's say he gets in there. He has nothing on paper, no stances that we can get behind, nothing. He's just who he is. And we're, you know, kind of flocking to him, you know, based off of, you know, our like for his politics. But at the same time, he's a member of the Democratic Party, and he has toed the Democratic Party line. Maybe he's not always with them 100% of the time, but he also endorsed Hillary Clinton. So to me, that makes him suspect. So I'm asking, why are we getting behind him and we have nothing to show for it?
Well, okay. So I think a lot of people are falling under the either or category in terms of this. So like they're saying, well, we support Keith Ellison, or we go form another third party somewhere, and that solves the problem. From my perspective, at least with this, he's better. And this is not the lesser to evil politics, or maybe it actually is.
Definitely is.
So it definitely is. But it's 10 days after the election. He's the first name they floated. he is better than any other name they floated by far. Your Howard Deans, your Tim Kaines, your I don't know who from the, I can't remember the name of the guy from the Podesta group from South Carolina whose name they floated, but he, of the people who I've heard so far, he's my second favorite choice. My first favorite choice is Nina Turner, because she's the only person out of those groups who did not come out in favor of Hillary Clinton being president. But here's the thing. For me, like you said, Keith Ellison, or really anybody, any name that they put forward, is not a magic pill. They could not put forth the name. They could not, if they picked Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. to be the head of the Democratic National Committee, it would not stop me from advocating for a third party. Like there is no final. I'm sorry, well, I was gonna say final solution. There is no ultimate solution to the problem that occurred during this last election cycle within the two-party system. So I appreciate that some people are looking at Keith Ellison as he's going to reform the Democratic Party, but I think that's not a waste of time. That's a short-term goal, if that makes any sense. I don't think Keith Ellison is a magic pill, but I think it's a short-term goal.
What exactly is Keith Ellison going to do? I think we need to stop just saying just because he supported Bernie or just because he's affiliated with Bernie. You know, Bernie has his own problems, and so do many other people. And I know nobody's perfect. But we need to have something on paper, like this is my plan. This is why you should support me to be head of the DNC. Something other than, of the names floated, his name is the least repugnant. Because to be honest with you, that's not a place where you want to be.
Second least repugnant. The least repugnant name is Nina Turner. From my perspective, because she's the only one who maintained her ideology, maintained her ideals throughout the cycle, throughout the primary cycle, to the point in which they did not let her speak at the primary. And for me, that is a boon. Keith Ellison is a problematic figure for a lot of reasons. He's a problematic figure for his stance on the Middle East. He's a problematic figure for his stance on national security. He's a problematic figure on the surveillance state. But like I'm saying, I am not of the opinion that there lies a solution within the Democratic Party. My fear with Keith Ellison is that he's being used, and I'm going to assume that this is your fear too. He's being used by the people behind the scenes, your Chuck Schumers, your X, Y, and Z's, as token for progressives. That he's sort of being what they're going to push out there, but the infrastructure that led us to this problem in the first place is going to be largely intact. And so even if Keith Ellison is perfect, let's say, the infrastructure that he's working within will cripple him and eventually corrupt what he's going to try to do.
Do we know where that echo is coming from? People in the chat are complaining about the echo there. Oh, we can get the caller in, yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm still here. Say it again.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, Bryce.
No, I don't hear him yet. Oh, okay. My question for them is, do you believe that a market crash is going to happen during the Trump administration, and how would that affect things in terms of policy? Yeah. How would it affect the policy? How would it affect everything? Yes, correct.
Yeah, I got the question. You can go ahead and first, and then I'll give what I think.
You can go first. Fine.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is, it is possible that there could be a market crash. However, we've seen that, the current status quo that we have is remarkably resilient, and it's able to change forms and misdirect and make sure that, whatever it gives is token at best, and that the underpinning, the undercurrent state remain, basically unchanged. So even if we were to have a market crash, I fully expect to see something which protects the elite and locks the cost of that protection, basically on the rest of us. And I expect the policy not to be changed really at all. Perhaps, if the left were to take the moment and actually provide an alternative vision rather than standing up with neoliberalism, it could be something that could be used to affect great change. But as of right now, I'm still unsure the left is really is mounting that. I think they're more inclined to align with neoliberalism and again tie ourselves to a brick and go try to swim the English Channel.
Yeah, so I want to address the idea of a market crash. I want to pull everyone away from this kind of apocalyptic rhetoric surrounding Trump. Whether we're talking about a market crash or the deportation of every immigrant ever, or like a Muslim ban, or all of these things that kind of have been drummed up as what the end of the world that Trump is going to bring. And the reason why is not necessarily because he won't be an awful president, but because you'll set people's expectations so low that he will, simply by nature of being bad and not awful or even decent, he might just be, decent. If he can put forth some sort of pro corporate jobs bill, he'll just be decent, when you compare to other people. So the lower our standards are, the easier it is for him to exceed them, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I've continuously said that if he puts forth a corporate friendly jobs bill and the world doesn't just blow up, some people will see that as a successful presidency, and there's a lot of areas where he could technically outflank Democrats and basically usurp the little area of the right that they carved out for themselves. And, it's going to be really dicey. It's going to be really dicey there.
Absolutely. And you bring up the Democrats. So I've seen a lot of people, especially as they float names like Tim Kaine for president in 2020. I think he shut that down and said he's not going to run, disappointing all 5 of the Tim Kaine fans out there. Sorry, all 5 of you, but I doubt that there's a lot of overlap between Tim Kaine fans and the Benjamin Dixon show. So I'm not too sorry. As they float Chuck Schumer, as they float all Kristen Gillibrand, as they float all these names, you see a large contingent of the left kind of adopting this surprise, sort of, that they didn't learn their lesson. And so, if your position is that you want to work within the Democratic Party, if your position is that we're going to take over the infrastructure of the Democratic Party because it's necessary, what you need to understand is you're going to be fighting tooth and nail. And I'm not saying you don't do that. But I'm not saying that's it's a bad idea, but I am saying understand that the Chuck Schumers, the Dianne Feinsteins, the Nancy Pelosi's, these people are not going to cede power simply because they lost. They won't. That's not happening. They're not going to cede. They're not going to, well, I see neoliberal policies lost us this election, so I guess I'm out and I'll let a real progressive take over my seat. No, that's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. There is no lesson for the Democratic establishment in this. There is no lesson they can effectively implement other than try to ride the coattails of a sort of fake progressive agenda, if that makes sense, Nick.
Yeah, I think I said this before on Project Sanity. I was like, hey, if your idea is to be an insurgency and to take over the Democratic Party, what you have to understand is you're going to have to be against 95% of Democrats, 90 to 95% of Democrats, because they are basically, their person was Hillary Clinton. Their people are people like Chuck Schumer. That's their brand. And if you want to take over the Democratic Party, you have to understand is like, that's who you'd be fighting against. And you can't fight them by trying to align with them because you fear Trump. Because when you align with them, you're reassimilating back into the structure that they still have control over.
Yeah, I mean, that seems fair. But my point, and I agree with that point. So I just want people to understand what they're taking on, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not saying that there needs to be a whole Dem exit. What I'm saying is there needs to be a Dem purge, period. If you are in favor of taking over the Democratic Party, understand you're talking about getting rid of a large portion of Democrats in order to institute any real change. There are certain people who I think are worth keeping. Keith Ellison's one of them. Do I think he's the best? No. Do I think he's worth keeping within a new Democratic Party? Maybe. Bernstein's not a Democrat, so it's what it is. But my point is this: these Chuck Schumers. They're not going to learn. They simply won't. That's not how it works. You can't ask. What are they going to do? I mean, let's be fair. The only lesson that can be learned from this election is that neoliberalism does not work as an electoral strategy on the left. Probably not on the right either, because Trump didn't really run on a neoliberal strategy. He ran on a fake populist, pseudo white nationalist strategy. It was basically a grievance-based strategy. So the point becomes, how do you communicate? Like, how do you make people realize that they're extinct?
Well, power structures are going to defend themselves, and they're going to use anything that they can to continue the situation that they have, especially when they have like a dominance. And neoliberalism is no different. So, I mean, we have to basically get to the point where, we draw a line in the sand and we say, you're either going to do this or else. And that or else needs to actually have some weight behind it. And it needs to be an or else that will say, it doesn't matter what the GOP is going to do. That doesn't matter. We're going to do this or else. Either you're with us or you're not. And if you're not with us, we're going to get you out of here and we'll deal with the GOP later. And I make this argument all the time. People say, well, you can't just let the GOP do whatever they want. These losses that we're suffering right now, these are losses dialed in because we didn't start this 8 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago. These are losses because we didn't do the work then. We need to start doing the work now so we can have big victories 8 years from now.
Oh yeah, and so that's a really important thing to bring up. So I don't know if you saw the Dave Chappelle sketch on Saturday Night Live, the one where he's at the election party and they're counting down the results and they're all surprised by the fact that Trump won. But there's one line in that really encapsulates sort of the liberal bubble, where he says, with changing demographics, Republicans might never win another president. They're going to be a fringe party. I want people to look at the map. I want people to get a map of the United States and pull up all. I'm sure I think Ben did this 2 nights ago. He pulled up all of the state legislators that are controlled by Republicans. And people need to understand that even if you consider Republicanism, their ideology, as a fringe ideology within America, the brand, the team is winning. They've won already. We've gotten to the point where the majority of state legislators are controlled by Republicans or self-described Republicans. The House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court is primarily Republican. And in the states and cities that are not Republican, they still have a healthy minority. And so I don't understand why there exists this mentality on the left, amongst a certain, I would say, effete liberal upper middle class left, that the Democrats are somehow winning. The Democrat, they tout out these polls that most Americans are progressive, most Americans identify as X, Y, and Z. But if you look at the actual numbers of what's going on in America, the Democrats have been losing for a very long time, and progressive ideology has been losing for a very long time. It's only in these bubbles where Clinton was going to win in a landslide, these bubbles where Clinton was polling so far ahead of Trump, these bubbles that were burst by the election results, that people believe that the Democrats are winning something. They've been pushed to the brink. The Democrats are a fringe party, at least in terms of when it comes to actually controlling anything.
Yeah, I want to say it's not because the Democrats are losing because they're losers or whatnot. They've embraced neoliberalism, and neoliberalism as an ideology is losing, and it's not just losing here; it's losing around the world. So, everybody will make an argument that we took over the Democratic Party. I will make the argument that no, the people have never really had control of the Democratic Party. What we won were concessions. We won some concessions, but as soon as we let up the gas, and said, okay, this is good. As soon as we let up the pressure on them, they went back and did exactly, what they're going to do. And now we're worse off in some respects than we were when we started. So, the argument can always be made. Do you want to take over the Democratic Party? Do you not want to take over the Democratic Party? I'm of the opinion that the Democratic Party is wholly bankrupt, and there's no reason trying to keep it around. But if people are stuck on it, I'm saying if you want to do a strategy where you try to take over the Democratic Party, we should at least do it effectively and not fall for the same old tricks. And I think right now, Bernie Sanders, for all the good he's done, he's being used by the party to escape criticism. He's going to be the face of the party, and they're going to keep on doing the same thing that they've been doing. And that's unacceptable. We need to basically stick a gun to their head, not literally, but figuratively, and say, you're going to do this or you're done. We need to be willing to do that. And if you're not willing to do that because you're afraid of Republicans, then you're going to just lock us into this cycle and we can never win anything.
Well, I mean, for progressive, it seems like we're flanked on both sides. Well, that's what flank means. But we're fighting a war on two fronts. We're fighting the neoliberal Democrats and we're fighting the GOP, and it comes down to like, what do we want to tackle first? Like how do we oust the embedded neoliberals within the Democratic Party? That's a very tall order. And I would say that I think the appeal of the Democratic Party is its infrastructure, its reach, its name recognition. But for the most part, we've seen what happens when that infrastructure is utilized to its poorest within this last election. Like the Democratic infrastructure, for all of its reach, was barely used properly. And look at the Latino outreach. Look at the African American outreach. Like where was all of that in 2016? It was gone because we had people at the helms who didn't know what they were doing. So I think the Dem machine is pretty good, but the people in charge are just out of control in terms of what their desires are for the system.
I mean, all I know is the Democratic Party has name recognition that's not necessarily negative to 50% of the population, but the other 50% is a very toxic name recognition. So, for all those advantages, there are disadvantages that come along too.
Well, here's the thing. That's the thing as well, because 50% of the population doesn't vote. So 50% of the population doesn't give a crap about the Democrats or Republicans.
25% of the population.
But that's my point. Is that ultimately both the Democrats and Republican are fringe parties, right? Like ultimately, of all the people in America who are capable of voting, half don't vote, and then 25% vote the other one of two ways. Some out of fear, some out of whatever. But the Democrats, again, they tout this sort of this ideology. The Republicans are fringe. People don't actually like them, but no one likes the Democrats either. Because like functionally, no one likes them either. So I think there's room for a third party, but I think when people get into this mentality, they need to understand what they're signing up for. So we won't, and I've said it before, we won't have a viable third party candidate for the national election for at least 20 years, maybe longer. I mean, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start working now. That doesn't mean that's not a worthwhile goal. And no one should tell you it's not simply because you can't have it tomorrow or 4 years or 8 years from now. But it's important that we have short-term and long-term goals. A decent short-term goal is to try to use the Democratic try to use the Democratic infrastructure and sort of move towards more Bernie Sanders-esque candidates, to, putting them in positions of power and ousting those who are embedded with neoliberals. I think that ultimately the left needs its own Tea Party. The progressive movement needs its own Tea Party. We need to do to the Democrats what the Tea Party did to Republicans, and primary, put money behind these people who can actually challenge people like Chuck Schumer, can challenge people like Nancy Pelosi.
I'm of the opinion you don't need to necessarily take out every last one. What you do need to do is take out a few powerful individuals, very powerful individuals, take them out, and everybody else will get the message. And that's really how you can work it. Now, as far as saying we need some sort of Tea Party, the Tea Party was willing to let the other side win. The Tea Party was saying, if our guy doesn't win, the Democrat can just have it, and we're going to get our guy in next time. How many liberals are you saying that are that serious about taking over the Democratic Party?
Well, they need to be. I mean, I think the liberals
scared. We can't let a Republican win, and they'll vote for the very thing that they're trying to get rid of. They'll keep it going. They'll perpetuate it. Hillary Clinton was the same thing.
Well, that's because the liberal, I would say mainstream liberals have two flaws that mainstream Republicans do not have necessarily. A, they dislike their own base because I don't know what you'd call it. They have a sort of sense of fake maturity, fake centrism, a fake desire to negotiate with the other side, to be viewed as reasonable, to do these things. So they dislike their own base to the point in which they will admonish their base first. They will admonish the Bernie bros insofar as they exist before they will admonish, or rather not before they will, but they will group them along with the right space as being just as bad when they simply are not. And two, they are conditioned to accept very, very small victories. I think a lot of the victories that people on the left tout as being victories are simply penances. They're rhetorical victories. You can't say the N-word on national TV anymore and run for president. You can't call was gonna say you can't say pussy, but obviously Donald Trump destroyed that record as well. So, but they never took a hard line stance against racism. I think that's another important thing to understand about why Trump won. For all of the, they're very quick to call people sexist and racist as a way to red pill conversation and make sure no one can actually compete with them in the culture or whatever. But they've never put policies behind actually confronting racism at its sources. They never put
in terms of the Clintons, they actually, fomented a lot of highly racist policy, for political gain, so they don't have the moral high ground on any of that stuff. The Democrats having the moral high ground on social issues, that's a new thing. That's something that they came around to for certain sections, aka the LGBT community, and in some respects, somewhat the Latino community. That's about it. They didn't even have that. We're not too far away from that massive crime bill that they implemented. We're not too far away from cutting welfare, which disproportionately affected people of color, not just black people. Black people are the worst off, but everybody of color. So this idea that Democrats have the moral high ground, and that's not even talking about foreign policy. So, even their social progress that they want to trot out there as if their main accomplishment is riddled with holes. And it all comes down to, them wanting to give a facade of change to a certain section of people, just enough to hold election and nothing more. And some people do see through it. And I want to talk about Bill and Hillary Clinton specifically because everybody makes it seem as though there wasn't a lot of left criticism and opposition to them back in the 90s. And I think, somebody made a point that they were on Yvette Carnell's show, the guy who wrote the book Super Predator. Bill Clinton's use and abuse of black people. And he talks about, a lot of people opposed the Clintons, when they were in the presidency and they were passing this awful policy. But when we get that re-imaged history, all that's never told, and they make it seem like the 90s were this great time and that we weren't, experiencing problems with the Democratic Party even back then. So we have to just keep that in mind when we're dealing with the Democratic Party and understand that if you change a face, it doesn't mean you've changed the pipes. You haven't changed the structure. You just changed the fixture.
That's true. I mean, so like I said, I don't think there's a solution within the Democratic Party to the problem that we're facing as a nation. I don't think there's a solution within a two-party system. And I think that anyone who thinks that any candidate, regardless of how bulletproof their resume is, and I'm not saying, and I don't think that Keith Ellison's record is bulletproof. I don't think that Bernie Sanders' record is bulletproof. I don't think that Tulsi Gabbard's record is bulletproof. I don't think that Nia Turner's record is bulletproof when it comes to being 100% on point with progressive values as we describe them, because no one's perfect. But so my position is this: there is no perfect solution within the two-party system for this. There is it just doesn't exist, because ultimately what you get is what we see now, which is a degradation of both parties into the same on a vast majority of issues, and then rhetorically different on very few. And as you put it very eloquently, the past 2-3 Democratic presidents have not been great on social issues. They've just been great on moving their mouths the correct way. They've been great on saying the right things. They've been really good at pandering. But we've reached a point now where there's enough information out there, there's enough counter narratives, there's enough evidence that's readily available that it's very hard to trick people. It was very hard for the Clintons to trick. It was very hard for Hillary Clinton to trick millennials. It was very hard for her to trick the Latino community who had to live on.
I want to break in there. No, it wasn't too hard for her to trick millennials. I don't believe that. I believe that there are plenty of people out there that believe in the Democratic Party as this left-wing source. And when you start bringing up real questions about our society, about what we would like to see, they don't even understand what you're talking about. One example, I said, well, maybe we shouldn't let the market decide, what the prices of homes are and where people live. And when I said that, the first thing that people were saying was, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Yeah, the market is the best thing ever, blah, blah, blah. And these are Democrats. And then they say, well, what's your solution? And I was like, well, first, you need to recognize that there's a problem. Don't just ask me for a simple solution. because you don't even understand that there's even a question. You haven't even questioned what exists. You're not even ready for an answer, even if I had one ready made for you. So, I mean, we have to get there first.
Thanks, Morpheus. That was very insightful. That was a very insightful non-answer. But no, I agree with you. I think that the fall in two-party system too. People are unable to think outside of certain boxes that have been constructed. If you have both parties saying you can't have single-payer health care and there's no viable alternative, it seems as though you can't have single-payer health care. Like it becomes reality when functionally it's just people not thinking outside of the box created for them.
But guess what though? On top of that, let's say I have an understanding that somebody else doesn't have of a particular issue. That doesn't mean the person that doesn't have my understanding is stupid. We have to all remember that none of us are immune to propaganda. And I think this election is prime. When Hillary Clinton first won the nomination, I said, "Oh, she's probably going to lose to Donald Trump." But here we are, 6 months down, or 5, 4.5, 4 and change, whatever. Months down, I believe that Hillary Clinton probably wasn't going to lose to Donald Trump. How did that happen? It was because I was around so much media that basically they created a situation where I believed in their bullshit. And then right after the election was over, I said, "Oh, she lost." I was like, see, I should have went with my first mind because I saw this a long time ago. But nobody's immune to propaganda. Nobody's immune to that subtle manipulation of expectations.
Well, don't blame yourself. I think it's a combination of both things. In this case, I think it seemed pretty much that anyone could beat Donald Trump. That a ham sandwich could have beat Donald Trump. It's just Hillary Clinton had the political acumen of less than a ham sandwich.
Well, the point I was making, I'm responding to some of the comments that I'm seeing here where they were saying people are stupid, and I'm like, well, it's not necessarily that they're stupid. It's just that it takes rare individuals to be able to sometimes break free of all the bullshit that they're fed on a daily basis, 24 hours a day. It could be something as simple as, why are CEOs paid so much money? I encounter that type of BS all the time. And I'm like, hey, CEOs that doesn't benefit anybody. There's no reason why they should be paid 600 times what somebody else makes. And the common argument is, well, they generate so much value. I'm like, well, no, they don't. There are people that innovate things and create things, scientists and whatnot, like the guy who created penicillin, the doctor who created penicillin, and he gave it to the world for free. Imagine how many people's lives are saved by penicillin. Imagine how much good penicillin does. And he is not, some multi-billionaire. Yet some guy who puts some images on a screen that you can move it with your finger or whatnot, he's a multi-billionaire, and he didn't even come up with half of those ideas that are there. He just knew how to work a system. And he's a multi-millionaire, borderline billionaire. It's like our system doesn't value people. Our system doesn't reward people based on their actual productive value. But just getting that through to people when they've been fed that it does, it's just difficult.
It's not even only that, though. It's also that fact that we view it as somehow not reasonable to ask certain people to martyr themselves for society anymore. And I don't mean like physically martyr themselves, like actually die. But I think, let's remember like what happened with how we got the Civil Rights Act passed, like how we got some of these actual, these progressive pieces of legislation passed through Congress during the Civil Rights era, the 60s. And so the president had to go to members of Congress, to these Southern Democrats, and say, I know you're going to lose your seat. I know what's going to happen. You can't, like you're a Southern Democrat. It's like your constituency won't like you for it, but America will thank you in the future. I need your vote. I'm your president. Do it for me. Like, do it for me. Do it for America. And they did it. And a lot of them lost their seats. And but now it seems like a very reasonable thing when you try to explain to people, oh, well, we can't have X legislation because we know if the law, even with, let's say with President Obama. And I think that I disagree with some of what Ben thinks about what was reasonable to ask for President Obama for. And at a certain point, if you're going to be a leader, if you're going to be a representative, if you're going to do these things, if you're going to work for the betterment of America, you have to be willing to actually, because it's like he said in the beginning, he'd rather be a really good one-term president than a really, really mediocre two-term president. But as soon as he got in office, as soon as he got in power, that kind of went out the window, and everyone sort of forgot about that as an option, that you could just do really, really well for a short period of time. You can just go in there and pass single payer healthcare. You could fight for 4 years and do your best to get a single payer healthcare, to get a public option. And then you might not win again, although I'm not convinced that you wouldn't win again. Like, I'm not convinced. I think that falls back into the sort of the narrative that to be a Democrat, to be a viable candidate on the left, you somehow have to go to the right and be in the middle. But people seem to have believed this narrative that the only way to exist in politics is to be incredibly mediocre and corporatist. And I just disagree with that on its face, because we've seen some of the best legislation passed when people have been willing to give up their seats. People have been willing to just, sacrifice themselves, fall on their swords, fall on their belief, simply get things passed.
And hold on. I do agree that may have happened for the Southern Democrats in the Civil Rights Act. However, what I will say, there are other areas where, they wouldn't lose their seat. We're at a situation now where the majoritarian sentiment on a lot of issues is not being responded to by our political system. So to say that, if you put a single payer healthcare system in, you would lose your seat is not correct. It's likely that you would retain the seat. It's likely that Democrats, if they actually did have like a New Deal like agenda, that they would actually gain more power, not less, especially if they produced something. And this goes back to Barack Obama's first term when they had that supermajority. Everybody says, well, in 2010, they lost all those seats all across the nation because, Democratic Party voters just don't turn out during midterms. That's not correct. To buy that narrative says that there is no feedback between performance of a politician, performance of a regime, performance of an administration, and the voters the next election. We know there is a feedback. People look at that. They saw what he did. He didn't do very well, and they judged him on it and voted against him because of that. That's what happens. The same thing. Barack Obama's presidency is full 8 years. All of that, all of the criticisms about that administration fell on Hillary Clinton. When she said she was going to continue his administration's policies, those criticisms fell to her, and it cost her being able to win this election.
See, I don't disagree with you, and I think that my point was not that he would have actually lost a second term presidency. And my point is not that they would have still lost the Senate majority had they passed single payer, had they forced things through, had they called in all the favors to get, let's say the cap lift on Social Security to get single payer healthcare. My point is that they would not have lost them. That wouldn't have occurred. But even if they would have, they should have still done it. That's not a reasonable argument against it. Is what was my point. It's not a reasonable argument to me to tell me that the reason you didn't do your best, or the reason you didn't advocate and pull out all the stops to get something passed, was simply because you felt that it was more important for you to be in office for 8 years than it was for you to get anything of note done. I'm a decent enough fan of Obamacare. I think that it's all right, it's decent, but again, it's like a lot of people said, it's half the loaf, a quarter of the loaf, really, and no one had any inclination, no one had any desire to go for the full loaf. They were just, okay, well, it's a handout to the insurance companies, but it's what it is. But my larger point was, we have to start expecting more from our politicians. And for a large portion of our country, it seems very reasonable to not expect our politicians to do anything if it might cost them their seats. When I think that for not only our politicians, this critique extends to journalists as well. I think it seems very reasonable to a large portion of our populace to not expect journalists to martyr themselves for the truth, to somehow expect them to go, okay, well, if they have to print a fluff piece, or if they can't print something because they might lose access or they might lose their job, that seems reasonable. You don't have to be a martyr for your cause. Like, yes, you do. Some jobs you actually have to be a martyr for your cause. I would say a politician, you have to be a martyr for your cause. I would say a policeman, you have to be a martyr for your cause. A journalist, you have to be willing to martyr yourself for your cause. If you're not willing to die for an innocent man to be saved, you shouldn't be a policeman. If you're not willing to lose your job to print the truth, you shouldn't be a journalist. If you're not willing to lose your seat in Congress to make sure that the rest of America has single payer healthcare, you should not be a representative. But a large portion of our country, we feel that, well, going along to get along is reasonable, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah,
and I would say that.
I've talked about that quite a bit. These are positions, particularly people that work in the power structure as politicians. These are people that are cogs in the power structure. These are people with power so to speak. And here they are, basically bowing their head and not really doing what they said they were going to do in many respects. Like, these are individuals that took a vow to represent a constituency and argue on their behalf. But oftentimes, some of them treat their constituents with contempt. They don't want to hear what their constituents have to say. They don't want to represent them. They want to basically, manipulate them into keeping them in power. And they're there for their own ends. And that's horrible. It's horrible. And in the same token, you have individuals like Bernie Sanders who believes in certain things, but instead of trying to fight for those things and possibly theoretically losing or not being popular or something along those lines, they would rather bow their head and get along and try to see what they can get out of it rather than fight for the full thing. And I've spoken about this plenty of times. We have to have politicians that say, look, is the party important? Is my own individual interest important? Or am I here to do what the constituents sent me here to do? And so far, we've seen many leaders and many politicians where the party seems to be the first loyalty and their constituents may come third or fourth or fifth.
So, no, I absolutely agree. And I think I fall a little bit closer to the middle than you do, I think, on this when it comes to the Bernies and the Keith Ellisons and Elizabeth Warrens. So I agree that I think that a big part of politics is knowing what hill to die on. I think you need to go far enough I think you need to advocate for exactly what you want, for more than you want, so that if you're forced to fall, at some point along the way, you get at least half of what you want. The Democrats are notoriously bad at negotiating either on purpose or by accident. I don't pretend to know, but they're notoriously bad at getting what they want. So, you advocate for single payer so you can get to a public option. Like, you advocate for the progressive ideal so you can get to a moderate left or even a centrist idea. But so while I'm not in favor, that's a strong word. While I'm not inherently opposed to a Keith Ellison being head of the DNC or somehow Bernie being in a position of power, what I do think is important is that they need to account for why they supported Clinton. They need to account for why they came out vocally to support someone. And then upon it being shown that she was colluding or rigging, or they were putting their finger on the scale, or whatever you want to call, whatever word game you want to play with what occurred between the DNC, the media, and the Clinton campaign, why they didn't immediately withdraw that support. Like, why were they still so comfortable supporting her even after it was shown to be it'd be farcical? And for me, and this is where we agree, simply telling me you were afraid of Trump is not a good reason, because that shows me you're a bad leader. You being motivated by your fears as a leader is not attractive to me in a way that I would consider you to be a viable candidate, because as you said, it shows that when push comes to shove, when you're put up against a enemy that you think is very frightening, you will back away. You will back down because you feel that if you lose, you'll lose something inherently.
Yeah, and look, I don't blame each individual person, if that's their stance, if they're going to back down when things get tough. However, you signed up for leadership, and we're in a dark place right now, and you need to have the strength of will and the courage to stand strong, even when all the forces are aligned against you, to stand strong and basically move forward. And I think for the most part, a lot of our leaders just aren't ready to do that. And if they're not ready to do that, we need to basically, get them out of there. And as sad as it may sound, this does include people who so-called call themselves progressive. But when, it comes time for the rubber to hit the road, for the rubber to meet the road, what do? They run. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders could have used her endorsement in the middle of the primary. She's so progressive. Now, if you look at her voting record, it's not really that progressive. But okay, the media calls her progressive. We've been force-fed that she's a progressive. So let's just take that as a truth per se. In the middle of the primary, she was completely silent, neutral. Where was she? Nobody knew where Elizabeth Warren was. She's staying neutral. Oh, she's working something out, some kind of deal out. She's playing three-dimensional chess. No, she's not. So all of a sudden, as soon as Hillary Clinton gets in there, I'm ready to get out there and get people excited about Hillary Clinton. I'm so excited. Nobody wants to hear that. Go sit down somewhere. Because when you were really supposed to get out there and do something brave for progressivism, you ran. And so now you want to run and tie yourself to neoliberalism. You deserve to sink with them.
I refuse to believe anyone has ever been excited for Hillary Clinton. I think that every picture I saw of someone cheering for her was photoshopped. I think that David Brock is just really good at Photoshop, and that they need to Pokemon go away, all of them, because they are. It's again. I don't know if it's hubris though. Like I don't know if it's hubris so much as it is what can you actually do. I will tell you this, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I do feel bad for working class white voters. I feel bad for them because they've been homogenized as this group of Trump voters that have no legitimate grievances with the system simply because they're not a person of color or a woman. Because let's be honest, we talk about working class white voters. They're indexing the fact that they're all male, but there are plenty of working class white female voters. There are plenty of working class black voters. There are plenty of working class white voters who are progressive in every other way for on social issues, who simply are facing the realities of the neoliberal economy. And there are plenty of them who didn't necessarily vote for Trump. And they have been homogenized and scapegoated perhaps more than any other group after this election as the inherent racist. Like there's something inherently racist about the working class white voter. And I know I feel awkward coming out and saying that, and all this, I feel bad for white people, working class white people, and not Muslims and not females. And although again, working class white people includes women, obviously, although you'll never hear that when it. Not saying I feel bad for black people, but I feel bad for the Rust Belt white people who Clinton didn't even visit. We should talk about that. We should talk about Clinton's ground game and how weak it was compared to Trump's ground game, at least in terms of actually getting out there and holding rallies.
Yeah, I mean, I think at a certain point, Hillary Clinton decided that it was best not to actually be out there campaigning, but to be at, high dollar fundraisers with noise machines, so nobody can hear what she was saying.
No one likes Clinton. Like every time she spoke, and I know this is a Jimmy Dore thing, but he's right. Every time she spoke, people liked her less. So I don't know if actually going out to the Rust Belt states would have helped.
Hello?
But I mean, at least you should try.
I mean,
You hear me?
Look, bottom line is we need leaders that are not going to toe the line just to get along with people. Like that is number one. That has to stop. Oh, let's go ahead and answer that. Let's answer the call.
Let's get a caller.
Yeah,
Who's calling?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this whole thing with them making Bernie Sanders a leadership position of outreach, it just goes to show that this is one of the reasons they support. By the way, this is Scotty from Columbus, Ohio. Like they decided to give him a fake position that didn't even exist. The whole sheepdog theory, like they're just using to herd people back into the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like what I said. I said this earlier that, they want him to be the face of the party. They want him to basically cloak it in some sort of new brand. But the real position of power, the minority leader of the Senate, was given to Chuck Schumer, which is Wall Street. And our interests diverge. I'm sorry, but our interests diverge. So either the Democratic Party is going to align with Wall Street, which is, they basically put the Wall Street person in charge of the party, or they're going to align with Bernie Sanders, or his agenda really so much. I don't want to make it about Bernie Sanders, but his agenda, they gave the Bernie Sanders agenda, a token position that was made up that has no real power, so that he can just be the face and they can just keep doing the same old.
Well, absolutely. And this is where progressives and Democrats and all these other people need to become a little bit smarter. But I would agree with what Nick said earlier about the drop off in voters for Democrats being indicative of them getting smarter, being indicative of them, actually understanding what the Democratic Party is about and not simply an issue of outreach. It's like Elizabeth Warren said in a speech, obviously too late, that it's not an issue of messaging. It's not an issue of outreach. It's not an issue of infrastructure. It's an issue of, or at least not only, it's an issue of ideology. They just don't have an ideology that is motivating people to vote for them. And at the end of the day, if you aren't offering anything different than the Republican Party, in fact, you're offering, in some way, you're offering something worse than the Republican Party. You're offering the status quo, and Donald Trump was offering, if nothing else, but change. You're going to see your votes drop off, and in a lot of ways, what's been going on in the DNC in the aftermath of the election, whether it's blaming sexism, whether it's blaming Bernie, they're still blaming Bernie, and that's sad because he really leveraged a lot of his, I would say, a lot of his street cred. A lot of people who supported Bernie in the past and who have supported him in the future are not going to support him now simply because of what occurred at the DNC. And they're still blaming him. And it's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, it becomes Democrats, they think we're stupid. Like ultimately they think we're stupid because they're pulling the same game that they pulled. Like it's a cloak. Like you said, it's a cloak. Like they think the Democrats think we're stupid. They think that the drop off was something other than people becoming hip to their game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with that. Let me ask you this. I still keep hearing people talk about, well, this time we're going to hold them accountable. It's like, what does that look like? What does holding them accountable look like? What does it look like to you?
No one was ever going to hold Hillary Clinton accountable. I don't even understand, at least not in any meaningful way. So for me, holding someone accountable is to literally hold them to account for what they did, with the hopes of changing that behavior in the future, or rather with the intention of changing that behavior in the future, not the hopes, the intention. So for example, if I'm going to hold someone accountable for something, say if I hold my employee accountable for skipping work, there's the implication that I will fire him if he keeps doing it. If I hold my child accountable for not doing his chores, I will punish him. If I hold X, Y, there is the sense that there is an or else. So when people were talking about holding Clinton accountable for what she did, holding her feet to the fire, making sure that when she was bombing the Middle East, they were going to hold her to account, what they really meant was they were going to whine. It's like, that's what they really meant. They meant that, the progressive, quote unquote, progressive news outlets, they were going to inform people, whine for 4 years, well, whine for 3.5 years. And then when the Republicans put forth Ted Cruz in 2020, they were going to champion her cause again and pretend like nothing occurred in the past. But nothing occurred in the past 3 years because we have another worse candidate. So I never believed anyone was going to hold her accountable. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because I knew I couldn't hold her accountable. And also, here's the thing, and this is, we have another guest coming on with us. We have Adair Schmidt, and after I make this point, I'm going to bring him in. I'm sorry, Adair, you've been saying very quite nicely. Even if I could theoretically hold her accountable, let's say if I complained enough, if I informed enough people of what she was doing, she would stop. Why would I ever vote for somebody? Why would I ever actively lend my voice, my democratic power, let them represent me, if not only after I vote for them, I have to literally watch them like a hawk and harass them for 20 hours, spend 20 hours of my week educating myself on what they've done and harass them in order to get them to stop? Because ultimately, let's be honest, like, if someone told you that you should marry them because they'd be good for you, like, they make a good wife, a good husband, a good either or both. I don't know what how you would explain it properly. But if you didn't watch them every day, if you didn't go through their emails, if you didn't, if you didn't track their phone records, if you didn't spy on them, they were going to cheat on you. If you're, unless you're non-monogamous, whatever. Let's not get into it. You wouldn't marry that person. You simply wouldn't. And so why would I ever voluntarily get into a relationship with a politician where they will only represent me? They will only do what I say. They will only be what I want them to be if I'm forced to watch them constantly. And people make the false dichotomy and the false comparison to Bernie Sanders with her. So they would say, well, even if we voted for Bernie Sanders, that we would still have to hold his feet to the fire. We'd have to watch him. We'd have to, stay informed. There's a difference there. And the difference is this. If we believe everything Bernie said, we believe, and there's no reason to disbelieve Bernie about his particular, he's been very honest about what he stood for. And I have no reason to disbelieve stands for supporting Hillary Clinton, that he would not have done a very progressive, a decently progressive agenda, a New Deal Democrat type agenda. If the difference is this, That's not holding someone's feet to the fire. What that is that is giving someone popular support so they can resist the temptation of falling, or they can resist moneyed support. They can resist special interest groups. That's not holding someone's feet to the fire. That's supporting. That's supporting representative. That's supporting your leader. There was no accountability for Clinton, and I think that everyone who heard that argument understood that. And, or rather, not everyone, but a good portion of people, voters, understood that if you vote for her, if you lend your voice to that, if you cross that boundary, if you vote for, if you violate whatever moral red line that you had that kept you from voting her in, there was no going back. There was no stopping her from doing anything that she wanted in your name. And I think for a lot of, and sorry, I've been going on for a long time. I spoke to a friend of mine, a 21-year-old who's going to vote in his first election. Because he couldn't vote for Obama last time, and he said very clearly, he was like, I'm not voting simply because I don't want my first election to be like this. Like, I don't want, and obviously I think, why don't you vote for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson, well, not Gary Johnson, why don't you vote for Jill Stein? And he gave me one of the two-party BS answers. And I was like, okay, fine. But I mean, I think it's a reasonable argument. It's like, if I'm going to vote in my first election, why would I vote for a candidate of either party who violates my moral red lines and there's nothing I'll be able to do about it? Why will I vote for my own violation? Well, let's bring Adair in real quick. What do you got to say there?
Just real quick, because the conversation has been a lot about holding someone's feet to the fire, but I want to say this. I think you're looking at it differently than at least I would in this case. I think Hillary Clinton's feet were held to the fire, because the way you hold someone's feet to the fire if they're a politician is simply by not voting for them. People didn't vote for her. Trump was holding her accountable. That vote for Trump is the vote to hold Hillary accountable by most of the American populace. To your point earlier, though, about feeling bad for white people, I for doggone sure don't. I don't feel bad for white people. White people are the only demographic group that Trump won, and the only demographic group that, based on his social policies, have nothing really to fear. His economic policies, that's a whole different ballgame, but even then, you see a much more drastic effect on minority communities. But the Rust Belt voters who voted for him are going to be the ones he hurts the most. That's why the market has actually kind of bounced back a little bit, because his policies of cutting taxes for rich people, making it quote unquote easier for manufacturing, those are policies that help out wealthy people that have their college degrees, people that have post-bac and all that other fun stuff. They're going to be fine. But that working class white voter who did not vote for Clinton because they remember NAFTA is going to be the one who gets hurt here. And so the only way they can hold Trump accountable is by to not vote for him again, to do the same thing they did to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was held accountable in this general election because people did not vote for her. The DNC, however, when you talk about the DNC being corrupt, the DNC is corrupt. The only way you change the DNC is if you change it at the local level. The local folks send their people to the DNC. It's comprised of members from all 50 states and some of the more elite people. By the way, I actually got the chance to meet Keith Ellison while in Philly. Keith Ellison is actually someone I have a great deal of respect for, just as a man, not necessarily as a politician. But just as a human being, I think Keith Ellison is actually the person for the job. Well, we talk about Democrats not learning their lesson and get mad that they give Bernie Sanders a position on outreach. What would you rather them do? I'm sorry, he's not a Democrat. He said he's not a Democrat, so I understand why they don't give him leadership. I don't think Chuck Schumer's the person to give leadership to. But I think if you want to talk about, hey, people didn't come out and vote for us, so let's use someone that can actually speak the language of these people, that has gotten people involved and active in the Democratic Party, so much so that an entire state party is about to undergo radical change to the left. I think it's a damn good tool, and we just have to be willing to use it.
Well, here's what I would say, and I'm going to let Nick get in because I know he wants to say something, but I'm going to say something for you. I don't think so many people keep talking about Trump going back on his policies and doing all of these things. And, he's not going to build a wall. He's not going to actually bring jobs back to the Rust Belt. He's not going to, be. Here's the thing, though. I don't think we live in a political system where that actually matters. I don't think we live in a political system where people actually expect politicians to keep their promises anymore. I think that people expected that of Bernie. I think that people did not expect that of Clinton. They don't really expect that from Trump. And what I mean by that is this. what the Democratic establishment created, what the Trump versus Clinton election created, was a scenario where Trump earned a lot of people's votes just by saying things that were on their mind that no one else was saying. He earned a lot of people's votes simply by going to places and saying, hey, you know what? I am tired of NAFTA and I'm tired of all these pro-corporate establishments exporting our American jobs and overseas. And, and I go around the country and people are doing poorly. And he didn't like, he did bullshit people, but he didn't feed them that kind of America's still great. America's always been great rhetoric. He told people, like, you've been suffering, like you've been suffering, man, and it's her fault, and it's NAFTA's fault, and it's the establishment's fault, and I'm going to help you. I'm with you. Like, I've been suffering too. I don't know why people would believe that. So I think that a lot of people were sold simply by hearing someone say something that no one else was saying. I think that a lot of people were a lot of Democrats voted for a lot of Democrats in Rust Belt voted for Trump, who voted for Obama, because Obama was saying things that they hadn't heard before. So in a lot of situations, I think people are being swayed simply by hearing someone say something that they were thinking, and not necessarily. And that's enough. That's simply enough in a lot of situations. But Nick, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, number one, I agree as far as him using the language that was anti-trade. That's not something that they've actually heard before. And just to speak about, well, actually, excuse me, that's not something normal. I believe Barack Obama also had something to say about NAFTA, during his rise, and it was also very, opportunistic of him to have that to say. But again, Donald Trump did hit those things. But if we're talking about the DNC, number one, like as far as Bernie Sanders being in leadership or not, I personally am not invested in Bernie Sanders being in the leadership, because, I mean, again, anybody who stood next to Hillary Clinton, to me is already suspect. And like you said, we have not seen any repudiation of Clinton type policies or Clinton type politicians. We haven't seen any repudiation of that. So this really isn't manifesting itself as some sort of insurgency. It really is just like, the new wave of Democrats coming in, and they're going to be basically, cold or kind of like fall in line with the Democrats that are already there. And you can't say they aren't, because a lot of these, Bernie-crats or whatnot, they were all caping for Hillary Clinton during the primary. I mean, during the actual election season. I was looking at a lot of their pages, and that's when I stopped supporting a lot of them.
I will admit, I agree.
I want to ask a quick question, Brandon. What new Democrats are you talking about coming in just being the same people? What meetings are you going to where these are the people you're running into? Because these are not the meetings that I'm attending. These are not the Young Democrats meetings before, where maybe 10 people showed up especially in a rural county, to now where there's 70, 80 people, so much so that they're actually leaving rooms. These aren't the folks that are coming in. These folks that are coming into these meetings, at the very least here in Washington State, are not these typical, okay, I'm fine with these policies Democrats. These are people coming in and saying, nope, the only way to enact change is to be the one who shows up. These are folks coming in and turning out rooms. These are people running for state committee person, running for caucus positions, running for party leadership positions, at the very least here in Washington State, that are absolutely the anti-Clinton, that are the actual blue-blooded liberals that are out here doing what they're saying they're doing. So I want to know what meetings you're going to and seeing these folks saying, well, I'm going to be the basic quid pro quo Democrat, because this is not what I'm seeing at the grassroots level, at the local level, which is where change occurs in a party, and especially in a democracy like this. If you don't change the people that are sitting in the room, you don't change the policies. I'm not beholden to Bernie Sanders. I am beholden to the ideas of Bernie Sanders. I am beholden to the ideas of liberalism, of moving forward. But to paint a bunch of these folks with a broad brush like that and say, well, because I'm seeing this at the DNC level, this is what must be going on everywhere else. And that's not at all true.
I just want to interject for 1 second, Nick. I'm going to let you in back, and I just want to make one point because Ben's not here, and I just want to speak up for him. One thing that Ben was saying earlier, and this is David, producer in the back here. one thing that Ben had been pointing out is saying that he's been urging, along with Michael Solomon, we talked about it like last week or earlier this week, that people should be going to these meetings and basically trying to take over the party. And I just wanted to speak on Ben's behalf because it sounds like what Adair is discussing now is he's acting out what Ben's been suggesting. But Nick, back to your point, not to talk over you.
Yeah, again, I didn't say all of these Democrats are all doing this one thing. I'm saying a lot of it just looks like the same old to me. Now, at the DNC level, that's not at the local level. So maybe there's something different that's going on specifically in Washington. But I have gone to the Democratic local meetings here, and that's not happening. So there's just something totally different going on in Washington. Maybe that's a different story. But as of right now, I don't see that. I see most people, are basically down with the Clintonism, and they're and you know what, they might not necessarily like Clinton. They might not necessarily say, well, we agree with those policies, but in the end of the day, they're always going to be stuck in that two-party trap, and they're always going to say, I had to vote for Hillary Clinton because she's better than the other guy.
Well, I think
that's what I've seen. I've seen it.
Well, I think there is so there is a danger here. There's a danger in trying to focus either too locally or too nationally. We have to understand that both are going to affect each other. People are going to look at the national level. They're going to look to the president. They're going to look to the head of the DNC for some kind of guidance on what they should do at their local level. And the DNC, the Democratic Party, it gained some power from having local politicians speak up for them and all the other things. So we need to really, this is not either or, this is both. This is a both type scenario. We can't simply focus on local Dems. We can't simply focus on, I don't think that at the local level, I would argue at the local level, we need to actually be focusing on alternative parties now. Like if we're going to be doing things at the local level, we need to be focusing on progressive Dems, and where there aren't any progressive Dems, establishing viable independent candidates. There's no reason why we can't do that for your city council. There's no reason there are reasons, but there's no reason that we shouldn't be doing that right now.
Yeah, and again, I don't think I ever said I'm going to put an emphasis on the local or an emphasis on the national.
Oh no,
I was just saying, what's going on in Washington is not necessarily indicative. Just like what I was seeing with a few individuals is not indicative of what's going on across the nation. What's going on in Washington is also not indicative of what's going on across the entire nation.
I would disagree. I would thoroughly disagree that what's going on in Washington is an isolated case, because one of the great things that I really appreciate about Bernie folks, at least those that I met in Philly, is we have a really strong network where people in these other states are sharing the pictures, sharing the videos, showing what's going on in their states. Have you heard of the Jefferson electors? It's a group going around. It's a traction that's coming on. It's a bunch of the Electoral College members who are actively working to get people to change their vote from Donald Trump. It is going on right now, putting in that groundwork across the U.S. Guess who that was started by? Bernie folks. That's what I keep coming back to. Because I've seen it in other stuff. I've seen it in other spots. Maybe Washington is more liberal. Maybe we're better able to get in there, and maybe we're able to better mobilize in some places. But I've seen it in Oregon. I've seen it in California. I've seen the meetings in Arizona and New Mexico and Montana and New York and Florida and all over the United States, where you're getting people actively involved. But I would disagree that you can't just focus on one level. I think you have to focus on one level to start. You have to focus on one level. You have to focus on what's going to affect you most. And frankly, your city council is going to affect you more than Donald Trump.
Let me put this out there. I'm 100% against the Electoral College changing their vote to Hillary Clinton in this case. I think that is not only a waste of time. It's not going to be Bernie Sanders.
I don't care who that's not the point. The point is not a particular person. The point is to drop Trump below 270. The point is to say that the Electoral College's historical purpose, the reason it was invented, was to stop the rise of demagogues like Donald Trump. That is there. So technically, that's what it was.
The reason the Electoral College was invented was to maintain power for rich white landowners. Like any other interpretation of events,
I would call him a demagogue. I feel like when you hit rich white landowner, I feel like you've hit demagogue territory 9 out of 10 times.
Well, then the first all the presidents
for demagogues.
All the presidents we've had before before suffrage was expanded to include non-rich white males would all be demagogues then.
Do you hear me arguing that George Washington, John Quincy, all of them folks, all the way up through that. Yeah, no, even hell, I'd go as far as up into the modern day. I'd call them.
But you said, but your premise of your argument was that the electoral college.
So my argument is that it's meant to stop it.
But all of those presidents, it doesn't work then if that's his purpose.
Because here's the thing, and that's fine. Just because something hasn't worked before doesn't mean it can't work now, and that's the problem that I keep running it. That's one of the problems I have with both Dems and progressives.
Well, what I'm saying is, if that's its purpose, it really fails at that purpose. That's not its purpose.
People
if that
aren't.
What it was designed to do, it doesn't do it.
No, that is absolutely its purpose. I would say it's the education that's been failing people. I would say that most adults don't know what the electoral college is. A lot of them are just like, oh, this is what happens. So and so is president. Most of them don't even know how electors are chosen. I mean, I ran for elector for Washington State, for goodness sake. All you got to do is show up. So what I'm saying is people, yes, that's its job, but also it's a lot easier to have it work the way you want it to if people just don't know what it's about. But I have this issue with hearing Dems and liberals constantly want to get at each other's throat, constantly want to say, well, why don't you do this, what libs, or why don't you do this, Dems? But neither of them actually doing anything about it. There's got to be action.
I just want to reiterate. I agree. We have to be active, and we have to we have to have, not only short-term goals, but midterm goals and long-term goals. And we gotta stop thinking. We gotta stop focusing. We gotta stop missing the forest for the trees. We also have to stop missing the trees for the forest, if that makes sense. We have to actually focus our efforts. And I don't think that there's any. Here's what I'm gonna say. So for the people who are saying Dem exit, that is great. Go be the people who are starting a third party. Go do those people. For the people who are saying I'm going to work within the Democratic Party, good. Be those people. But here's the thing: do not cajole people who are doing one or the other. Understand that we need people doing both. We don't need all hands on deck making sure that Ellison or Warren is the head of the Democratic National Convention, the DNC. We don't need all hands on deck making sure that we have a viable third party in a local council race in X, Y, and Z. I mean, ideally you can do both, but this is about understanding this is a multi-front war. Progressivism is a multi-front war, and we have to start making the case to normalize progressive ideas within the mainstream media and also within mainstream society, because that's one of the biggest hurdles. People talk about the mainstreaming of white nationalism with Trump, but the Democratic Party has done such a poor job of normalizing the policies of Democrats, of traditional Democrats. They very rarely mention FDR. Like how often did Clinton mention FDR during the primary?
No,
I mean Bernie did.
If you go back to the Clintons' time, or Democrats right before Clinton, even as far back as Dukakis, a lot of articles were saying that before Clinton rose, when he really rose to power, he rose because they put the old legacy of FDR, they put that behind them, and that's kind of what chronicled their rise. So you're not going to hear them talk about things like FDR. That's just not what your typical neoliberal is going to do today. And what I would argue is we have to remember that if the New Deal was really as successful as we say it is, we wouldn't be dealing with the same struggle right now today. Yeah. The New Deal had some failings, and those failings were that it left many things in place that allowed the power structure to come back and grab back all those gains. So, I think we should be thinking about how to do better than the New Deal, move further such that they can't just come back and easily reverse it all.
Well, my whole thing is that the New Deal only failed insofar that we had a series of presidents who did not continue to expand it. Because to be honest, the New Deal didn't end with the New Deal. It became the Great Society. Is that right? Yeah, it became the Great Society. And then suddenly everything was rolled back. And we see that with a lot of things. We see that when we talk about the Civil Rights Act, we talk about the Voting Rights Act. Ever since the 1960s and 70s, every little social program we've had, from Social Security to welfare to Planned Parenthood, has been rolled back under these neoliberal presidents. So okay. I don't know if we can ever have not infrastructure, but plan or politics or any kind of policy that is impossible to ever roll back if the people in charge want to roll them back. But my point is that we need to do a better job as progressives, as liberals, as whoever we want to ascribe, whatever idea we want to ascribe to ourselves, to make the argument for these policies. And right now, with the most damning problem with the Democrats is that they don't make a good case for being on the left.
Well, they don't make a left-wing case at all.
They don't make a left-wing case. They make a platitude case.
Yeah, and on top of that, okay, so here's what I want to say about the New Deal. You know, first off, yes, it was racially implemented and things of that nature, but ultimately, you know, like I said, when I was speaking to Benjamin Studebaker, we were talking about systems and institutions, and institutions are only as good as their ability to resist corruption and stagnation. So obviously, the New Deal wasn't the institutions that comprised the New Deal were not very well thought out if they were unable to resist corruption and stagnation, and I guess because of that, degradation. So we have to look and see where it failed and make it better and move beyond that. Also, we have to adapt it for the new challenges that this world today face. There may not be enough jobs for everyone to have to work to survive. So those are things that we have to face in today's world. So we have to actually pull back that stuff and then reconfigure it, make it better, and also apply it to new problems that we face today that they didn't have back then, such as surplus labor.
You want to deal with surplus labor. I mean, again, I've been a fan of a universal basic income for pretty much ever, but that's my opinion on things. Universal basic income, universal health care, universal education. Let people do what they want to do. Let them do what they find fulfilling. Your worth as a human being should not be what you contribute to the labor force.
But again, how do you accomplish that? What kind of policies, what kind of institutions do you have to put in place to accomplish that? And then on top of that, how do you keep it that way and keep it from being clawed back? Those are the questions.
Those are the questions. But we can, so here's what I'm looking at right now is we've seen some test cases already done where it's been successful. I believe it's in Ontario right now, up in Canada. They're doing another one. They're giving people a $1,300 Canadian dollar a month, universal basic income, no questions asked, something much like Social Security, where they send you the check, you have that money, that's yours to do whatever you want with it. There's challenges and systems that need to be addressed for sure. But a good first step is talking about these ideas, is getting these ideas out there and talking to folks about it. Because if you tell somebody, hey, I just want to make sure that you have enough money that you're taken care of and you have surplus money to insert into the economy however you would like, that humanistic ideal, I think it's a good starting place. There's kinks and bugs that need to be worked out for sure. Okay, but we can't get there unless we talk about it.
Well, again, so we're talking about it, right? But now these are ideals. Now, how do we get them in place in a political system that utterly rejects every last one of them? You know, so now let's start putting this stuff in terms of like, how do we get this stuff out there? How do we gather support? You know, how do we counteract? How do we counteract a political system that's hostile to these ideals?
Well, by not succumbing to fear. Well, here's the thing. I would say, but the first step is not succumbing to fear. And I think that the issue with the Electoral College changing their vote, with all of I'm going to say the anti-Trump protests, but a lot of these protests are not so much anti-Trump as they are anti-electoral system in general. But to not succumb to fear and not succumb to irrational thinking and not succumb to tweeting out 27,000 tweets about hate crimes every day. The trick is to accept reality for what it is, understand how you got there, and start to thinking of ways to create infrastructure to get you out of that position. That's where I agree with Nick. We need to start re-emphasizing infrastructure, not just infrastructure as it means roads and bridges, but infrastructure as in the infrastructure of a healthy liberal society, a healthy progressive society, and get people thinking about the structures that actually improve and exist within their life. The only reason they can cut so many things is because people are so ignorant, and not stupid, but I mean ignorant, they don't know, and apathetic about so much of the infrastructure that affects their life. And so when people made the decision to burn the house down, to not vote for Clinton, to, lesser two evils, whatever they were doing, very rarely did they think of the FDA. Very rarely did they think of the EPA. Not that the EPA and FDA really operate to the capacity they need to operate at within our society, but again, different story. So we need to shine a spotlight on what the government does through transparency, but also through education. And this comes down to really understanding understanding what your government does and trying to establish new regulations, new infrastructure to get it to do what you want it to do. Because let's be honest, when we talk about neoliberalism, we talk about Reaganism and people say Reaganism, but at this point it's Reaganism, Clintonism, Obamonomics, Bushism, whatever you want to call it. Obamonomics is a great name for it. We're not only talking about people getting rid of institutions, getting rid of infrastructure, getting rid of laws. We're talking about corporations building new infrastructure, building new laws, having new laws passed to benefit them. They didn't simply tear down the old system and let it be anarchy in the US. They built a whole new system meant to benefit them.
But I do want to say this: we cannot marginalize people's fear. We cannot say
I absolutely can. I can absolutely marginalize.
No, you cannot. And here's why I want to say that.
I just did.
No, you don't get to do it. You don't get to tell people that that being afraid is something that they're not allowed to do, that they shouldn't.
Fear is the mind killer.
No, hold on, because that's something you don't get to dismiss that, Brandon. That is A, not your place. B, not cool, because this stuff is actually happening to real people. Just because it's not you, in the town I live in, just 10 miles south, someone the day after the Trump presidency, make America white again. One of my friends walking down the street has had people try to run him over and, get out of my country. It's Trump's America. This fear is lived with. This fear is absolutely okay. What is not okay is becoming apathetic due to fear. What is not okay is to run from it. What we must do is confront it as we see it, but do not tell people that fear is not justified, that fear in this case is not acceptable. Fear is very much acceptable. You're afraid? I got it. That's fine.
I think the reaction to Trump, not by people who have experienced actual hate crimes, but by the vast majority of people who are bedazzling safety pins to themselves and attaching them to themselves without understanding the actual structural causes in terms of free trade regulations and neoliberals, and who are preaching this kind of this upper middle class liberal, who are preaching this kind of fear that their upper middle class white child is afraid of living in Trump's America. I do dismiss that fear. I think that there is a very I think that there is a very real fear I think there's a very real threat to a very decently sized portion of America. But I think that a lot of people, especially on the left, ginned up fear in not their base, but within their already voting in order to get them to vote for a candidate who was a warmonger, who was a neoliberal, who was a corporatist. They drummed up all this fear, and all it is going to do is when America does not explode, when all of our institutions don't come crumbling down, when there's no wall built, when we don't stop letting Muslims into the country, when the Middle East, when there's no nuclear bomb dropped, all it's going to do is make Trump look better, because the world did not end. So when I say don't be afraid, what I mean is understand the reality of the situation, be cautious, understand, but don't be so irrationally expecting the end of the world that you can't function day to day, and that you decide to go on these Hail Mary passes, like trying to get the electoral college to
whoa. Do not lump the electoral college thing in there with fear. That's not a fear-based tactic. That's not a fear tactic. That's the electoral college needs to go. This is killing two birds with one stone. B, instead of just saying, well, don't be afraid and just making a blatant statement, why don't you direct that at people who actually aren't afraid? Those people putting those doggone safety pins, those people aren't afraid. You want to wear a safety pin? How about instead of wearing a safety pin, let your friends that are actually in danger of hate crimes know, hey, if you need me, if you need help, I'm right here. I'm not going to come in and step on your toes. You tell me if there's anything I can do for you, and I'll be there to help. I've got friends out here that I've told I will walk with you to the grocery store if you need.
Okay, so if fear, yeah, exactly. It's like that really awful movie said, danger is real, but fear is a choice. And so I'm going to leave you on that. Do you, okay, so final closing statements. Yes, that was the tagline for After Earth, starring Will Smith and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. And so what I will say is this, You can be afraid, but you can't let it paralyze you. Don't be scared, homie. Nick, what you got to say?
Well, I was going to say this goes back to, something I've said a long time ago. People will believe anything because they want it to be true or because they fear it could be true. So we have to always be cognizant of making decisions out of fear because they may or may not be the best decisions. We have to try our best if we possibly can. I know it's going to be hard, but to try to understand that there is a root to a lot of these problems, and we can't just address the problems without also addressing where they come from.
Okay, you get the last word, Adair. Please go ahead.
For those of you at home who have privileged people like myself that are men, that are large body people, for those of you that are white that can do that kind of shooting, be good to your neighbors. Because there's people out there that are dealing with real fears of physical violence. It has happened to them already. I can't say it's going to get worse. I don't think that it will get worse, and I hope it doesn't. But be good to each other. And if there's someone that you know that could use your help, why don't you, instead of wearing a safety pin, get up and do something?
Wear 2 safety pins. This has been the Benjamin Dixon Show. My name is Brandon Sutton. You can find me on Twitter at PrettyBadLefty. In politics, you can catch Ben this Sunday with me and Anoa Changa on Politics and Grits. Oh yes, not only Ben and Anoa and Brandon, but also David Grossman, our producer. It has been wonderful filling in for Ben. I'm sorry I couldn't do it. I could never replace him, but it has been wonderful trying. Have a good night, everyone. Remember to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed the content.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.